it's like they couldn't handle the idea that there is a possibility that a religion could be true.
You get this aspect of prophecy and whether even someone cynically manipulating prophecy is still a pawn of prophecy themselves.
Of course we're going to have women fighting just as good as men, because that's what Hollywood's already embraced this a long time ago. If we were to go against this, that would, rather than, well, that's not in the story. Well, that doesn't really matter. We're going to do this anyway.
I guess really to summarize it in a very simplistic way, you could say empires fighting for big oil in the Middle East, except
it's not wrong.
Except it's in space and multi-planetary. Anyway, I think my favorite scene was the first time he...
Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
As you might be able to tell from our prop here, we're going to be talking about Dune Part 2, the movie that just came out on March 1st. We're recording this on the 7th, so hopefully by the time our podcast comes out, you have seen the movie, because this is going to be full spoilers.
Oh, yeah. Spoiler alert!
I'll say spoilers for the first and second books, but we'll try to avoid beyond there, because it gets really weird beyond there.
True.
Yeah. Andrew.
Yes.
So Thomas and I have both read at least the first book, and you haven't. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, I am only a film consumer for this particular thing.
Okay. And so I deliberately have not talked to you about this yet, even though I really, really wanted to. So I want to know, just kind of start with just the general opinion the movie made you form of it, and any questions you have, you can feel free to ask us.
Okay. So just a little bit of context. Before going to see part 2, I rewatched part 1.
Okay.
Just to have it fresh. In fact, I rewatched it the day before I went to see part 2. So it was almost like I got to see them back to back.
Yeah.
Uninterrupted practically. That was kind of a unique experience, I would imagine. So my first impression is that it is very, very serious.
Yeah. I think the word I used was intense.
Yeah. Intense is a good word. And I'd love to get your opinion at a later time in the podcast about what you think, if that has more to do with the director or more to do with the original author. We can talk about that. But I would say it's very serious, fascinating topics, very much like human condition kind of stuff. There are a lot of parallels I could see. I guess really to summarize it in a very simplistic way, you could say empires fighting for big oil in the Middle East, except
it's not wrong.
Except it's in space and multi-planetary.
Yeah, all the nouns are changed, but
right.
You pretty much got it.
Yeah, and there seems to be an Islamic type religious setting in a desert setting. A Messiah kind of figure emerges. He himself, however, in some ways understands who he is, but also doesn't really understand who he is. He's just a kid. I thought it was very fascinating. I could definitely see, based on what I know about when this came out and then other sci-fi things have come out, I could see the influence that this has probably had on everything.
Oh yeah. This may be, what's the word for a biblical story that's not quite biblical? Apocryphal.
Yeah.
This could be apocryphal, but allegedly when Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, walked out of the first Star Wars movie, he quipped, "I'll try very hard not to sue," which I think Star Wars is unique enough that he wouldn't really have had a case, but definitely a lot of inspiration was drawn.
Well, yeah, I would say, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit trail, but I would say Dune is a much more serious and theologically complex and geopolitically complex story that Star Wars comes at from a much easier to digest angle.
Yeah, for sure.
So I thought it was awesome. I will admit part 1 was harder for me to get into, especially coming in fresh with no context.
Yeah.
It was like kind of slow for me and a little bit just like disrupted because of how it ends. And it's like, okay, but if you watch them both back to back, it's like, all right, this is awesome. Really cool.
Yeah. I watched the first one like 3 hours before I went to see the second one.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I had the same
there
experience.
You go. That's good. Good.
Yeah, I watched the day before as well. I've watched it actually, and then the week and before I rewatched it so twice within a week of seeing
Good.
the part two.
Cool.
Yeah. So we're going to do actual reviews later, but I think initially our review is it's a movie worth seeing, right?
Oh,
Most
yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. No question about that.
Very well done. I mean, Denis Villeneuve
Mm-hmm.
does a great job as a director, as per usual for his films.
Yeah. I haven't seen anything of his get bad
Before
reviews.
this? Oh, okay. I was going to say.
So here's a question. Did you follow the whole kind of intricate political struggle that happened? Do you feel like the movie communicated that well from the beginning of movie 1 to the end of movie 2?
I think so. I will note that you need to pay close attention. And I did enter kind of with the expectation that I'd need to pay attention. And so as a result, I think I got a pretty good idea about the whole structure, the emperor and then the multi-houses kind of fighting for position in the empire and fighting ultimately for the emperor's seat. And then the emperor also at the same time kind of selectively trying to eliminate those who he does not believe are strong or capable of leading the empire in the future.
Well, that's his rationale that he gives. I think it's mostly he was afraid of Duke Leto.
Yeah.
And so he orchestrated his assassination, basically.
Well, Leto was coming to too much power, he thought.
Yeah.
That was the reason for, the what am I thinking? The conspiracy to get rid of him.
Send them to Arrakis and then kill them all.
Right.
Yes.
Using Harkonnen.
So since we've touched on this, I'll lay the bare bones of the political maneuvers that happen. So in the beginning of the first movie, House Arrakis is based on this planet Caladan, which is a water world, and it's nice and lush and easy to live on. And the Harkonnens control Arrakis, which is where all the spice comes from. And I'm not sure how well the movie communicates how important spice is, but the entire galactic economy is built on spice.
Yeah. It is basically, it's oil. It's crude oil.
Well, it's more than that too, but yeah, it's definitely a metaphor for oil.
It's the energy that runs everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the ability to travel can only happen because of the spice. And so that's why, the intergalactic travel is
Which is true for our oil.
Right, so that's the kind of oil connection there.
Yeah. So the Emperor orchestrates Harkonnens having to leave Arrakis and then the Atreides having to come and take over. And Duke Leto knows from the beginning that this is a trap. But he thinks it's going to be him versus the Harkonnens, and he knows how to fight the Harkonnens, so he's ready for it. So he goes to Arrakis and he's like, we can make this work for us. We'll find the Fremen, all that stuff. But the trap was too well laid, and the Emperor includes his entire private army of the best warriors in the galaxy to come, and the second movie says it, wipe out House Atreides in a single night. And it's effectively successful, except that Paul and Lady Jessica escape into the desert.
That's what we learn in the first film.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then in the second movie, you really see Paul come into his own in these kind of superpowers that he has. I wonder how some of the superpowers he has in the books are left out of the movie, and I feel like they were cool, but I understand why in a movie you have to cut things. But then, of course, Paul realizes he has the power to destroy all the spice. And since the entire global galactic economy runs on the spice, that pretty much gives him an ace in the hole. And so after he militarily defeats his enemies, he's able to say, bow down to me as emperor, or I destroy the spice. And people are like, well, dang, I guess we have to obey.
Yeah. Those were his father's nuclear warheads.
Yeah, that's the weapon he had to destroy the spice with.
And it is an interesting point that Herbert makes at this. If you think about that, he wrote this during the middle of the Cold War, and the atomics that each house had its own arsenal of atomics.
That's quite a parallel.
So that was kind of interesting because it was a way of keeping the peace in a way.
Right.
I mean, theoretically, that's what it was.
Yeah. Well, it was still mutually assured destruction, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also why, though, that Paul's plan was able to succeed because the threat of destroying the spice stopped,
That was mutually.
Right.
Yeah.
It would have destroyed the economy of the entire
Yeah, and not only that,
universe.
I'm going to dive in on the spice for a minute because I feel like, do you feel like you really grasp what the spice does just from watching the movie?
I think so. My understanding, of course, it is like an energy agent for propulsion space travel. But
well, no,
also
it doesn't actually power the spaceships. The spaceships are powered by some means that's never explained.
Okay. Well,
What it does is it lets precognitive people see, oh, if we jump in that direction, we go into a star and die. And if we go, a couple 100 miles to the left, then we end up at our destination safely.
I gotcha. So it's a cognitive enhancer.
Yeah. It's like a prescient
Okay.
a drug.
So I didn't fully understand that. So now I do.
Right. And the other thing it does is it's a anti-geriatric. So it keeps you from aging, or it makes you age slower.
I would not say that, at least in my perception, that was made clear in the movie.
Yeah. I think maybe they'll dive into that in the third movie, which I'm expecting after the end of that movie. I think you have to have a third.
Was that your take? Do you think they ended it with the third ready?
I think the third one's coming.
With Chani standing there waiting for a worm, you're like, okay, this is...
Yeah, you can't set up Chani and Paul the whole time and then have them separated at the end of the story.
Right.
Well, also, Paul is just like riding out to battle.
Right.
And what? Well, you're not just going to leave it there.
Right.
Yeah.
So the spice it ages you slower and it helps you see the future. The other thing it does is it addicts you to it because it's an addictive substance. And if you go off of it, you die. So everyone's really all in on spice. They have no choice but to make sure that spice keeps flowing, or the Reverend Mothers, all the Bene Gesserit, their emperors,
all the big
kings,
players,
all the politically powerful people will die from spice withdrawal.
But they're the few that are actually, and the Fremen are just because they live on Arrakis are naturally taking spice all the time,
like way more spice than a king would.
But then outside of or off Arrakis, it's only certain factions that are actually addicted to the spice.
Yeah, the big one is the Spacing Guild, the ones who actually run the spaceships.
Right.
So that's something I feel like the movie doesn't explain very well either. That there's all these political players. The movie, I feel like, talks about House Harkonnen, House Atreides, the Emperor, which is House Carino, but they don't really talk about that. And then the Bene Gesserit. And I feel like that's kind of it in the movie. But there's also these other groups that are very important. The Spacing Guild, incredibly important. They play a big role in the book. The Tleilaxu, who they're weird, but they basically can like do things like grow eyes. If your eyes get, destroyed, they can grow you a fresh pair of eyes. And, so they're cloners basically. And then there's some other groups too. But I feel like the movie simplifies a lot of that down, which is, I think, necessary.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, you had the Landsrad, which is basically the guild, Spicing Guild, is it? Or
no, the Landsrad is separate. So the Landsrad is
the
both,
Spicing Guild.
That's kind of the
economy
Congress of the galaxy.
Okay.
The economy is the Chom company.
The Chom is right. The Chom is
which is also kind of the same thing as the Landsrad, but they're politically distinct.
Right.
Yeah. So I think most of that is just new words to someone who's only seen the movie.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I heard none of it. And keeping up, just from the movie perspective, keeping up with the names and the terms is daunting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So on that question, what characters just their names did stick in your mind? Which ones spring to mind as I know who that is?
Well, Paul.
Yeah,
clearly.
The main character.
He's probably, well, not only because he's the main character, but he's, I think, the only guy, with one exception,
Duncan Idaho,
who has like somewhat of a normal name.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound made up.
That's the big joke. It has been for
Jessica.
years.
Lady Jessica.
Yeah.
He said guy. So technically.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you that.
Yeah.
That is the big joke. And it's like the first time you're reading it, if no one's told you about Dune, you open the book, you're like 5 pages in and you see Duncan, Idaho.
Yeah.
What the heck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He likes potatoes.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's kind of cool though, like the whole concept of humanity. This is humanity.
Yeah, it's 20,000 years in our own future.
Right. And humans are inhabiting multiple planets that are capable of human life. And some of the original things have still stuck with humanity for huge spans of time. And so the fact that those names still exist is kind of awesome.
Yeah. Someone compared the name Duncan, Idaho to, and I've edited it to make it, I think, fit better, the metaphor, but Julius Babylon. It's that kind of vibe.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So Paul, does Stilgar, did he stick in your mind?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think, Baron Harkonnen.
Yeah, Baron Harkonnen. Yep.
Yeah, of course, because he's sort of
the bad guy.
Totally saw where, probably where Darth Vader came from with him.
Well, in the book, he's not quite as menacing. He's this fat guy who needs, help to move around because he's so fat. So maybe, yeah.
The reason I say that is the parallels, like the familial parallels.
Oh, yeah.
like, Luke, I am your father. Like, he's the grandfather, but they didn't know. And
So that's a spoiler for the movie.
right.
Paul's grandfather is Baron Harkonnen, which
Right.
he doesn't know until halfway through this movie.
Yeah. And of course, Paul's mother doesn't know that that's her father. So that's sort of like
It's a big reveal in the movie.
Yeah.
I am your father kind of thing. But other than that,
It's
the
just
names-
too many names.
the names are overwhelming.
Yeah, that's fair
Yeah.
enough.
I can see that. I mean, even I've read the book a couple times now, and you just have to keep, once you get familiarized with it, once you know how to say the names and everything, then it's, then you can see the faces. And
Well, I remember after the first time I'd read the book, I was talking about it to somebody like 2 years later, and
Yeah.
I managed to pull from my brain the names Gurney Halleck and
Yeah.
Thufir Hawat, and I was
Yeah.
very pleased.
Well done.
and Thufir is not even in the second film,
Right.
which
yeah.
is strange to me. But
Well, he is in the book. So we haven't actually outlined what Dune Part 2 covers. So let's do that real
Okay.
quick, if we can. So it opens. Does it have like a little prologue with the Harkonnens or the Emperor, or does it go straight to Paul?
no, it goes straight to Paul. Although they do that thing where they have I don't know what language it's supposed to be, but it's kind of
Oh, yeah.
grunting language, and then they
I
have
think that's the Sardaukar
Like the
language.
text
that's
at the bottom of the
Sardaukar.
screen.
Okay.
Something
Yeah,
about
text.
spice.
Yes, and then it shows Warner Brothers,
Right.
and then we get into it, and it picks up right after the end of the first film where they're taking the body of
Jamis.
back to, I guess they're going to the Sietch Tabr.
Yeah, Sietch Tabor, or the movie says it Sietch Tabor, I think.
To return his moisture to the pool or the
Yeah,
well.
so-
I think it's spelled Tabr.
That is how it's spelled, yeah. So that's an important thing. And I know we said we'd outline the movie, but just real quick, the lack of water on Arrakis is in the book, like one of the most important details.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. The movie conveys a lot of it, but I feel like they could have done more to make you
Yeah.
really feel water is scarce, and that defines every aspect of life.
To that point, and we'll get into this, I think, the two most important substances in this story are spice and water. And bar none, those are the two most.
Yeah.
But water's only scarce on Dune, on Arrakis. Everywhere else, it's normal.
And they don't, maybe they'll get into the third movie, but they don't get into the relationship, because there's a direct relationship between water and spice. And that's interesting. But
Yeah.
they didn't do it in the movie, so we won't talk about it here.
So it picks up with them traveling to Sietch Tabor, and Paul, as like a sign of respect, in the book, he actually cries over Jamis because it's the first person he's ever killed. And in the movie, they make it so that, I think there's only a little bit of this in the book, that Jamis was, in Paul's visions, really his mentor in his visions of the future. And then he kills Jamis before he ever gets to do that. And he's like, okay, my visions can change, but also I missed out on this great relationship with this guy.
Yeah, I don't recall that in the book. They do make that point in the movie, though, because
Yeah.
he's seeing Jamis tell him things.
So the Harkonnens show up and they have to fight some, and you see just how good the Fremen are at battle, killing the Harkonnens, I think, right?
Yeah.
And then I saw it a week before y'all. So where does it go after that? Does it go straight to Lady Jessica and her ordeal?
More or less.
Yeah.
So
I mean, they go into the Sietch, and they do spend. I mean, you made the criticism, but they do spend several minutes showing the kind of the ritual of taking the water from, from the bodies, and then there's Stilgar taking Lady Jessica down to where they have all the water stored, and pouring the water into it, and him making a big point of saying, this water effectively is worth more than your life.
Well, it's worth more than our lives. We wouldn't
Right.
touch it even if we were dying,
Right.
Because it has a purpose.
So they do. He doesn't avoid that. I think he does try to make a big point of it. You could say, though, was it consistent through the film? That might be where your criticism comes in.
Yeah. Well, because in the book, every aspect,
Yeah.
at every moment, you're aware that water is scarce, and that defines why they do the things they do.
Right.
So, they show the pool, and he explains this is for where all the Fremen across the entire planet are gathering water in pools like this, so that one day when we have enough, we can turn Arrakis from a desert world into a garden world, because that's the dream of all the Fremen.
Mhm.
And it's like a religious dream. It's like, this is why we fight so hard and why we put up with this lifestyle, so that one day we'll get to live in a paradise. And then the next thing is Lady Jessica's ordeal, where she goes from being just a regular Bene Gesserit. She's given the water of life, which is this special, super dense concentration of spice that lets you look into your genetic memories But women can only look at their female genetic memories, and that's not really explained in the movie. But so basically, it lets you access all the lives of everyone who lived before you, which gives you obviously huge
she
advantages.
becomes a reverend mother for them because they show that transpire. I thought that was really cool the way they handled that. That was really interesting. I think it gave the sense of what was occurring, and they also, which was a really important point, they also showed the fact that Aaliyah, which I don't know if they even mention her name in the movie, but maybe they do, her unborn daughter is impacted by her taking the water of life.
Yeah.
And I thought about this because we do talk about politics some. So what I thought was interesting was, and in the movie they can't escape this because it's in the book and they include it. Aaliyah is like a month old in the womb when Lady Jessica takes the water of life, and she is awakened to all the memories of all her female ancestors at a month of development.
And she's fully sentient at that point.
Yeah, and the idea is she is in fact a human, which is why this affected her.
Yeah.
And so it's just unequivocally stating that children in the womb are human beings.
Her mother and her are able to talk telepathically with one another. That's a great, really, observation of humanity.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
So on that aspect, how did you feel about Lady Jessica having all these comments of, your sister says this, your sister says that, the whole movie?
It was weird. It was really, really weird.
I think that's one of the key parts of the book, if you read it, is you realize, wow, Frank Herbert had some imagination.
Oh, yeah.
He came up with some weird stuff, and I feel like the movie cuts out most of the stuff that just makes you scratch your head.
Gotcha.
A lot of that got cut out.
Okay, well, understandable. You got to cut stuff, but it's fascinating. If there's more stuff like that, I'm probably going to read the books.
I think you should.
Yeah.
I think it's a classic for a reason.
Yeah, most definitely.
So
then we move to what basically there's a whole that, and I watched this movie with my wife, and she really enjoyed the first part or the
Part
first
one.
movie,
Yeah.
part one. Part two, this was her statement after the movie. Well, that could have been a 20-minute movie if it wasn't for all the fighting. And
fighting is kind of important.
So it's kind of important.
It's kind of important. It is very important. However, I kind of get what she's saying in that in this, whereas you were saying the first movie feels kind of slow and drawn out, this movie, because of there's so many different elements that are having to be kind of like pulled together to tell the story. And the fighting is an element of that for sure. But it can be, if you're not understanding what's happening, distracting too. And I think that that's what she came away with, because she was saying, boy, I felt like they could have done more here in story development rather than fighting.
Yeah.
So is that a legit criticism? In one sense, sure. I do think that there were things they skipped over they could have spent more time on, but would have that, by the same token, would that have made it more confusing?
Yeah. I for my part, I loved all the fight scenes. The final fight sequence I felt like was realistic. I might have liked it to be a little bit more stylized and movie magic, where you can have fights that last longer than human beings are able to actually fight one another. But it was a really good fight. I'm going to try to just do a one paragraph summary of the rest of the movie.
Okay.
Just real quick. So Paul finds the Fremen. He's accepted as one of them. Lady Jessica's now a Reverend Mother. He spends time training with them, learning their ways. And then he starts leading them on raids against the Harkonnens, blowing up Harkonnen spice mining facilities and stuff. And
meanwhile, like fulfilling prophecy after prophecy.
Right. That's the other thing. So Stilgar, who's like the main Fremen, the whole time, anytime Paul does anything, he says, "Lisan al-Gaib, it is as it is written."
Yeah.
He's the Mahdi. He's going to, turn our desert world into a paradise. That's the prophecy about him. And it's kind of funny. At one point, Paul even says, "I'm not the Lisan al-Gaib." And Stilgar says, "He's so humble. He says he's not the Lisan al-Gaib. He's the Lisan al-Gaib."
Yeah.
And so Stilgar provides a lot of humor, I think.
Probably the only humor.
Yeah, pretty much. As you're watching Paul do all this, you get these kind of cuts to Princess Irulan and the Emperor Shaddam IV.
Yeah.
And they're discussing the destruction of House Atreides and what their plans are moving forward and how they're going to deal with the Harkonnens and all that stuff. And eventually Irulan realizes, oh, my dad's about to lose the throne. How do I not have that happen? And of course, the Harkonnens are getting their butts kicked by Paul, who they don't know is alive. They just know the name Muad'Dib because he gains all these names when he joins the Fremen. So he has like 5 names.
Yeah.
The Harkonnens are trying their best to stop him. And then there's a great scene, one of my favorite scenes, where Raban, who's played by Dave Bautista, Raban goes out to fight, the Fremen, and he calls out, Muad'Dib, come face me. And then as soon as that actually happens and you see Paul walking towards Raban's like, oh crap, and runs away immediately without fighting at all. And it's this big, huge, muscly guy versus this little, tiny, skinny dude. And he's running away. It's such a great scene. And so the Fremen just give the Harkonnens just the worst time ever. You get this kind of cutaway to a place you haven't been before. The Harkonnen homeworld.
Getty Prime.
Getty Prime, which they, in the movie, chose to have a black sun, which I can't remember if that's in the book. But visually, it's incredibly interesting. Because it turns everything basically black and white. And you meet this character, Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, who's the Baron's nephew, and he's set up to be the heir of House Harkonnen. And one day the Baron hopes the emperor of the universe. And Feyd-Rautha has this duel with these last 3 Atreides survivors, one of whom is not drugged, and he has to fight him for real. And he has these weird people who try to help him, and he's like, no, I'm going to fight him myself. And then he wins and says, you fought well, Atreides.
Yeah.
Because it's supposed to show that this guy, who is a psychopath and a killer and evil, has this like core of not quite honor, but a spark of what could have been. Like if he was raised by someone who wasn't an insane, evil person.
Yeah.
And I feel like that comes across. And the idea is that Feyd-Rautha and the Atreides daughter, who was supposed to be born instead of Paul, were supposed to have a kid, and that kid would have been the original Kwisatz Haderach. But then Jessica had a son when she wasn't supposed to. Anyhow, so you see that and you learn that Feyd-Rautha is this fearsome fighter. Then you have kind of the climax of the campaign between Paul and the Harkonnen. Well, no, first, Paul's been trying to avoid this big crusade across the galaxy, and he finds out he basically can't. So he finally takes the Water of Life. It almost kills him. And then he goes and reads everybody's minds and says, you can't fight me. I'm better than all of you, which is true. And he leads them in the final battle against the Harkonnens and the Emperor, who has shown up on the planet, and he's ready to fight with his whole army. And Paul just beats them all without even trying, hardly. Like, he's just like, I'm better than you guys at warfare.
Well, not only that is that the ability that he has unlocked is to see the winning path, because he can see multiple futures now, right, and he can see where they're not going to work. It's like having a roadmap into the future. And it's not exactly like seeing the future, because there are multiple possibilities that could happen, and you could easily do the wrong thing and go down the wrong path.
But he can kind of guide his path.
But he can guide the path in the right direction. It's like having the ultimate strategic senses.
Yeah. So he completely beats them. He's gained his father's supporters who are still alive. They've come to him. Gurney Halleck is one of them. And they have this big battle with the Harkonnens. They kill them all. Paul kills the Baron. And then he captures the Emperor and has the Emperor a prisoner. And eventually they get to a duel between Paul and Feyd-Rautha. And these are the 2 guys who are supposed to be the heirs of the whole Bene Gesserit breeding program. And so the Bene Gesserit are like, let's not have this happen because we don't want them both to die.
Yeah.
But they fight, and it looks like Feyd-Rautha has won. But then, of course, because he's the hero, Paul wins.
Yep.
And then Paul declares war on the rest of the galaxy. And that's the end of the movie.
Which is kind of awesome and ridiculous and wild and all of those things.
Yeah. All right. So summary out of the ways. Are there any scenes that y'all really liked? Just talk about what you liked or didn't like in the movie.
Thomas?
Yeah. The scene that I think was the coolest scene, because it was kind of, this book doesn't tend to get into too much detail about how they fight or even the weapons. I mean, it has some general, but it doesn't really get too much into that. And so what I thought was that opening scene where the Fremen attack the Harkonnen, that Harkonnen raid team, that whole scene, especially when you see how the Harkonnen with their specialized equipment and suits were able to like float up the edge of the rock face to the top of the...
Yeah, they can kind of just push a button and turn off gravity.
And so...
It's awesome.
Yeah, there was elements of that where you saw a little bit of that in the first film, but I wasn't certain, like when the Sardaukar come down in various scenes, I didn't know if they were like just on like tethers slowly coming to the surface, or even though they didn't show a tether, you were just assuming it. Mm-hmm. But seeing the movie do it this way, you're like, oh, they almost have these like kind of anti-grav suits that allow them to kind of float over things, and so that was really,
it's a really cool
visually it was really stunning, and of course they take them all out and everything, but so from that point I felt like they've obviously spent a lot of time trying to get doing justice to what I would say is the combat ability, not just of the Fremen, but of the bad guys, of the Harkonnen. I mean, they weren't just like, well, they're bad guys, sloppy fighters, no wonder the Fremen are beating them. No, it was like, no, these are seriously dangerous dudes with seriously advanced fighting equipment. And the fact that they're getting beaten by a bunch of sand people, for lack of a better term, is one of the reasons, is a theme, I think, through part of the movie, why Rabban and then his uncle is so frustrated with him, because in their mind, throughout the whole movie, in their mind, the way they conceive of the Fremen is like, well, we should be able to easily wipe them out. We've got all this superior tech, and yet they still can't beat them. So I thought that was a really well done element where it was so interesting and something I've never seen done before in a movie. So that I thought that was really cool, and I didn't feel like I was watching anything that was overly CGI'd.
Yeah.
It looked like if those things
it looks pretty real.
legitimately existed,
like that's what
what it would be like. And I thought that was really cool.
The sandworms, every moment a sandworm is on screen, you believe that this is a real creature that could live in a desert.
Yeah. So cool. As far as the what's our term? Special effects or CGI or anything, none of it was. I didn't feel like there was a moment where I thought, I'm not quite sure that looks real.
I actually was talking to my friend about this last night, and he pointed out a scene that once he said it, I was like, I noticed that too. It's specifically, there's one vision Paul has of Chani fighting a bunch of Harkonnens in her full battle getup, and she, like, just in that one sequence, she looks a little bit too CGI. She moves a little bit too fluidly, too easily.
Okay.
And in that one sequence, I do remember thinking that maybe could have been done a little bit better. But that's the only scene in the entire movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thomas, I think your comment about the whole home turf winners or heroes is another interesting parallel that we've seen happen time and again in the real world.
Yeah.
Particularly with like guerrilla warfare and also home turf advantage in opposition to a technologically advanced and superior force.
Yeah, he wrote this before even the Russians went to Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
So interesting.
Because I think it's an excellent parallel, the Russians in Afghanistan, because the Harkonnens are even kind of Soviet themed in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody should have read Dune before like this latter half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st.
Yeah, maybe they could have learned a lesson or two.
Yeah. Anyway, I think my favorite scene was the first time he rides a grandfather worm, and that was just awesome.
Yeah,
it was just so cool.
It's such a great scene. At the beginning, all the other Fremen are like, you've never ridden a worm, call a big one, don't embarrass us. And then he calls one and it's the biggest worm they've ever seen. You're like, holy cow, not that big.
Yeah. I think a close second for me is when everyone is joined at the war council and they're all praying and stuff, and he just takes the position of the leader and everyone's getting mad at him, but then he like reads a mind and knows names that he shouldn't know.
Yeah.
And it's like the final confirmation that he is the one.
Yeah.
That everybody is now like, we're all on board now.
So that is a little bit of a change from the book. And I think now is a good time to switch to talking about the way that the book is edited for this movie.
Yeah.
But I think I've come up with an explanation for how he does that, because Paul can't read minds. That's not one of his abilities. But what he can do is he can access all his dad's memories, all his mom's memories, and etc., going back forever. And his mom is a Reverend Mother, so she also has all the memories of all the other Reverend Mothers who were in charge of the Fremen. So what I think is happening is he's looking at the previous Reverend Mother's memories and being like, oh yeah, I know this about this guy, I'll say it, and they'll be impressed. I think that's what's happening.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess we should do at this point, get into kind of like how faithful was the movie part 2 to the book. Because when we did the first movie, or when we saw the first movie, I was pleasantly impressed with how careful Villeneuve was to capture kind of the essence of the story and be really close to what the book was how the book laid out the world and the universe.
Yeah. I would say in the first part, the only thing that's left out is that Paul has also trained as a mentat, which is basically a human computer.
Right.
And other than that, the first half is dead on.
The Kwisatz Haderach, or however we say that word, is actually like a super mentat. That was the breeding program that the Bene Gesserit were after, through these thousands of years of breeding, was to come up with a super mentat who.
Well, that's not quite the case. I don't think. I think.
Well, that's what the book it says. That's the explanation the book has.
He's going to have all sorts of abilities, but the primary thing they're after is female Bene Gesserit. When they take the water of life and look in their ancestors' memories, they can only see their female ancestors' memories. And what she tells Paul in the beginning is, every time we try to look at this other place, it's dark, it's terrifying. We flee from it. We just can't bear it. And when Paul finally takes the water of life, he goes to that dark place, and it's just all his male ancestors' memories. So it's primarily they wanted.
It's all those toxic masculinity aspects of things. Yeah, but the whole joining of the two into this one Superman who would have the ability to do that.
That's what who can see the path forward.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it helps to also understand what mentats are doing. These basically supercomputer humans, making all these calculations and all these stuff. They're the ones that are the advisors to all the royal houses and everything. And so to have someone who has like ultimate knowledge, that's
it's godlike.
Yeah. So they explain that in the book. With a mentat, the more accurate data you give them, the better results you get, and it just scales up forever. Right. And then Paul has access to all of his ancestors' memories, which goes back to, in one of the later books, we learn one of his ancestors is Agamemnon, the Agamemnon.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. So he has memories for thousands of years of human history, and then he can also see the future. So he has access to basically all the data. So he can pick just exactly the right path.
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was so let me put it this way. The second part movie does differ from the book on several things that in some ways I understand, in other ways I'm not sure why. That's maybe the best way to put it. And whereas in the first film, you could say that we didn't really detect any kind of like concern about placating any kind of woke stuff.
Well, any modern politics in general, really.
Right. And other than you could say kinds, they changed kinds to a woman from a man, maybe that. But that
and the only other thing is they cut out a lot of the Islamic language.
Right.
So Paul's not worried about a crusade across the galaxy. He's worried about a jihad across the galaxy because the Fremen are Islamic derived. They're not really Muslims at this point, but they're derived from that.
Right. Whereas in this second film, I saw a lot more of those elements. Like, for example, the way the Fremen are presented to us, they're almost like the ultimate egalitarians, which is not what the book shows the Fremen as. The Fremen they are all equal.
They're practical.
They're practical equal, but they also have a very distinct division of roles. And so the men are the fighters, the women are the ones who are the homemakers, you could say, in the big H, homemakers. They're the ones that make sure the siege runs. They're the ones who train all the children. They're the ones who makes all the weapons. So
make the still suits that keep everyone alive.
Right. So there's a very strict division of tasks. And so whereas the way they present it in the film, you don't see any kind of division between male and female. You see the young effectively are all fighters, male or female, it doesn't matter. And so that element there is more modern and is not in the book at all. And because it's not in the book, there's some certain elements that he basically couldn't do because he decided to go this way with it.
Yeah.
For example, the biggest change, I think, or one of the biggest changes, is the fact that Chani and Paul have a child, and she's in a siege raising the child, and he's named after his father, Vito. So and there's a significant event that happens that you don't see in this movie at all based upon that. And so that's where I was like, wow, there's some changes they really did.
Chani's character got changed the most.
Right. That's by far.
And I will say, just a note on what you were saying, that Chani is with the raiding group that Paul meets at first in the book. So like women do fight. They are trained to fight. It's more practical to have the men do the fighting and the women in the siege. So that's what usually happens.
Right.
But the other thing is the other character they change a lot is Lady Jessica.
Yeah, they do.
Paul's mom.
Yeah.
In the book, if you're really paying attention and you read the second book and the third book, then you realize she really was kind of villainous, but not with evil intent. In the movie, I think she's depicted pretty much as a villain.
Yeah, I would say so.
Where she's manipulating everyone around her for her own ends and forcing Paul to do this thing that he says is going to lead to, millions and billions dead and people worshiping at his father's skull and stuff. And he's like, I don't want that. And she's like, do it anyway.
Well, like the movie depicts her effectively ensuring that Paul takes the water of life.
Yeah.
That the book, she didn't even know that happens. And
I think she knew that was part of the plan because he has to get the ability to resurrect my mother one day. But she doesn't put it into motion or anything. I feel like from the book, the whole time in the book, she's still uncertain that he actually could be the Kwisatz Haderach. She's still kind of like, he's showing all these signs that he could be, but she's still, and I don't know, I think maybe the book does a good job of this. It's just the tension of knowing and feeling, and maybe that's what is being depicted in the book. Well, the book also has, she's a mom who's worried about her son.
That's what I mean.
And every boy who's ever taken the water of life has died.
Yeah.
Universally. And that's just what's supposed to happen unless they're literally the Kwisatz Haderach. So you want to be absolutely certain before you tell your son to take the water of life.
Yeah. And in the book, the movie doesn't even really get into this, but in the book, Paul, you can see early on, takes a shine to Chani, and as she did him. And Jessica is against this because she's seeing the future. First of all, he's highborn. She's just a Fremen. So there's this class thing. But there's also, she's seeing the bigger goal that Paul is a duke and needs to get his...
He needs political allies.
He needs to get his, dukedom back, I guess, for the lack of a better term. And so she's looking at, you need to marry the right person, these alliances need to be developed, and
she says, just like your dad, because his dad never married Lady Jessica, even though they loved one another.
Right, she was just his concubine. And so there's this element where she is not happy that Paul and Chani, they basically become a couple, and they're basically like they're married, but there's just no marriage ceremony or anything. And so that becomes a tension point between them in the book. You don't really get much of that in the movie.
Yeah, the only thing you get really is like they're kind of like boyfriend and girlfriend, I would say, in the movie. And then when he's faced with the moment where he has to make that alliance and he's going to marry the Emperor's daughter, then she gets angry and heartbroken, runs away.
And it kind of seems like they break up.
Yeah.
Which is not at all present in the book.
Okay.
No.
He's clear to her, like he actually says in the book, you're the one I love. I'm going to have to marry this Princess Irulan, but she's not going to know a kind word from me, a kind touch from me. She's not going to ever share my bed. You're going to be the mother of my children. She's just the political alliance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a raw deal for Princess Irulan.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about kind of modern cultural themes or folk themes, I talk about the kind of the egalitarian stuff that's not actually in the book. But like we noted, Chani's character is probably one of the biggest changes. Mm-hmm. And I would kind of argue it looks like at the end of this film, the one most heroic individual is Chani.
Yeah.
She's the one who is still believes in kind of like ultimate justice and
she's kind of fighting for like democracy or something, which is just so out of place in the whole universe.
Well, she's the one who's going to stand up to power. She's going to put truth to power. She's there. She was the one that when everyone's bowing down to Muad'Dib, she's the one defiantly standing there like, no, you're just a human. You're just a man.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And so and
in the book, she helps build his legend from the get-go.
She believes in it.
And that's one of the big themes is that the Fremen in the movie, you're told the Southern Fremen are big believers. The Northern Fremen are worldly wise, and they're not taken in by this stuff. That's not in the book at all. No. The Fremen are, because there's no water on this planet, and they've had to cast aside all trappings of civilization except what keeps you alive. They are ready for their savior to come and turn the planet from a desert world into a garden world. And so they're like, you're the guy who's going to do that. I'm following you. That's all there is to it.
Yep.
Well, he fits the prophecy that they've all been taught since they were knee-high to a grasshopper.
Yeah.
They all believe, and that's one thing that I think the movie puts in there that the book, it's not, at least it's not in the first book at least, is the notion that there's true believer Fremen and then there's non-believer Fremen who are just kind of like and of course it's the young generation that aren't the believers, and it's the old generation that are, and you see that with Stilgar where it's almost like it's a joke. Every time Stilgar's like, oh, see, it's the prophecy, and you see the younger ones going, here we go again.
Yeah, rolling their eyes and stuff. And
like,
Stilgar...
It's the old okay boomer kind of.
Yeah.
The actor Javier Bardem kind of plays it for laughs.
Yeah, he does.
Where in the book, Stilgar is absolutely a respected figure. Like, he's the most respected figure by the Fremen on Arrakis, except for Paul himself.
Yeah.
By everyone. He's the best fighter, he's the best leader, he's the best at everything. And so when he says Paul is the Lisan al-Gaib, everyone takes that as a weighty matter.
Yeah, no. And unfortunately, because they make it kind of in the movie, they just don't make it like it's like they couldn't handle the idea that there is a possibility that a religion could be true.
Yeah.
And so everything is trying to be explained, not scientifically, but explained through, this prism of it's all been a big political manipulative system that's been put in place.
Right. Yeah. You get that definitely even from Paul's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
he doesn't believe it.
He doesn't believe it, and even all this stuff's happening to him. He's like, this is just my way to the emperor seat, basically.
Yeah, I think a lot of those changes have to do with if you read Dune Messiah, and especially Children of Dune, eventually you get this character called the Preacher, who his whole characterization is he's pointing out all the things Paul Atreides did wrong in his conquest of the galaxy and how he should have done it and how it's bad to just blindly follow leaders. But that's not until the third book. And so it seems to me like they brought a lot of themes from the later books into the movie to make it clear this is not a good thing to have fanatic followers and to go on a crusade across the galaxy. But I think it's more interesting if you at first believe it. You're like, yeah, Paul, go conquer the galaxy. Because especially in the book, he's given all these kind of excuses to do that. Like his son with Chani is killed by the Emperor right before he goes and it attacks the Emperor. So it's like, oh, you killed my son? All right, all bets are off. I'm going to do the thing I've been trying to avoid.
Yeah, there's the movie doesn't give you a good logic for why he decides, he's like trying to avoid it, and then eventually he's like decides, okay, I'm just going to take the water of life, and boom, after that he's like, I'm all in. And I just that's not how it played out in the story in the book. The book, there's more factors that would have caused him to embrace when he takes the water of life. He's able, like you were saying, he's able to start navigating the futures. He's able to start seeing paths that he didn't, and seeing the outcomes of them in a way that he couldn't before. And so that also gives him like a confidence and a boost to move forward with it. But like you said, with his son being murdered, him effectively embracing the expanding role of what's going to happen in the future. So he's no longer, in one sense, it's almost like he's no longer living in the present.
Yeah, and that is made even more clear in the second book.
Yeah,
at one point. Yeah,
right.
I won't go into that.
We won't go into it. But so the decisions they're pretty significant changes from the story is basically what I'm trying to say. And I see elements of it that are, like you were saying, because of the future books. So you could say, okay, well, he was just trying to bring that in because he's probably not going to do all the books.
Yeah.
But I also see elements of making it
more palatable,
or even just kind of embracing some of our cultural, modern Hollywood cultural values. Yeah. So they're saying, well, of course we're going to have women fighting just as good as men because that's what Hollywood's already embraced this a long time ago. If we were to go against this, that would, rather than, well, that's not in the story. Well, that doesn't really matter. We're going to do this anyway.
Yeah. You said earlier, it's almost like they can't imagine the idea of a religion being true, which I had that same feeling. But the thing is, the book kind of does the same thing. And Lady Jessica doesn't really believe the religion is true either.
Right.
And the whole time you're being told the religion is false, it was planted by the Bene Gesserit. And then Paul does all these things and you're like, well, maybe the Bene Gesserit meant it to be a lie, but it looks like it was actually true and they didn't even know it when they were doing that. So you get this aspect of prophecy and whether even someone cynically manipulating prophecy is still a pawn of prophecy themselves, and just that whole idea of spirituality kind of.
Sure.
And it's kind of like what it is. What I think, and I might be totally wrong about this, but what it reads to me when I read the book is if Frank Herbert had this concept of a godless religion. There is no necessarily almighty, powerful God orchestrating all the events of history. So that aspect, yes, he doesn't have that in his book. What he has, though, is seemingly this, maybe you could say, a naturalistic spirituality, where for whatever reason, all the plans of these different groups, like the Bene Gesserit and stuff, to formulate this messianic figure through their breeding program that's going to be able to guide humanity into the future. They're planning it and working it and everything, but there has to be this almost like supernatural element that's ensuring that certain things come together and work beyond their even plan.
Right, because the first thing that goes wrong in their plan is Paul is born as a boy instead of a girl.
Right, so there's these kind of things that are happening, and the fact that there's effectively, for lack of a better term, they're supernatural kind of abilities. Like, how can anyone know all of history of individuals before them existing just because of, those kind of things? He doesn't, beyond saying the spice, he doesn't really explain.
It might be something to do with accessing your DNA.
Well, no, genetic memory is his explanation in the book, but it's still magical.
Yeah.
You know, being able to remember back 2,500 years to the life of King Agamemnon of Greece, that's magic. You can't tell me otherwise.
Yeah. Well, more so for Paul.
Yeah.
It's more than 2,500 years for
No,
Paul.
it's 20,000.
Yeah.
2,500.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
So that element, it was there, the disbelief, but it wasn't there in the way it's presented in the second movie. Put it that way.
Okay. Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah. I think most of the changes are quite accurate, but I agree on Chani's character seeming, if there's any incursion of woke into this movie, it's in Chani's character, which is unfortunate because I think Zendaya did a great job and I like the character. It's just, it's not accurate to the book in a way that reeks of feminism to me.
Like it could have been.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't sad. It was like they're beginning to get into the love story, which is satisfying. You want to see this love story develop. And then her offense at him basically drawing power to himself causes her to basically say, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
I'm done with you.
And we've been going for a long time, so we should probably start to wrap up. But the interesting thing to me is in the movie, it makes it seem like Paul is saying, I don't want the crusade. I don't want billions dead. He takes the water of life and he's like, whatever, it's the only way, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
In the book, it's much more like he takes the water of life and he's like, okay, now I can see better which ways lead to that. And there's this one way that doesn't lead to that. And it goes the same way most of the way, but it diverges just slightly. I'm going to go for that. And he keeps going for that and keeps having to make slight adjustments and slight adjustments and slight adjustments until the thing he was trying to prevent happens anyway, despite his best efforts. Where in the movie, it's like, he's like, screw it. Let's kill everybody.
Yeah. So that begs the question, who's really in control?
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah. I will say the books are great at leaving you with questions and good questions. You're like, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
And that's the primary thing you walk away from after you read the books is questions.
So my question after watching this movie, because the way the movie ends also doesn't end the way the book ends.
It's close.
It's close. But the notion that he's immediately going to this big battle with the rest of the houses, that is not how the book ends.
Okay.
So now, part 3, which we're all expecting, is going to be interesting how that is presented, because it's starting from a pretty big deviation from the book.
It is. There's that one prescient vision Paul has, and I'm not going to expound on this, but there's a prescient vision he has of Chani standing on top of Dune, watching as an atomic goes off in the distance, and it kind of distorts her face and looks like she's a victim of radiation poisoning, basically. Yeah. That is deliberately, I think, foreshadowing for the next movie, because that's going to be something that happens that's important, not necessarily the way it happens in the vision, but the atomic and the fact that it can destroy your face like that and your eyes is important to know.
Yeah, I hope we didn't burst your bubble with enjoying it, though.
No, it was a good movie.
I still think it's a good movie too.
I do. I have more disappointments with this one than I did with the first one. That's the only difference.
I feel the same way. So, okay, we got to wrap up.
Yeah.
Out of 5, Andrew, how do you rate it?
Out of 5, we usually do 10.
Have we been doing 10? Okay,
Yeah.
out of 10, how do you rate it?
8.5.
8.5. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Thomas?
For movie quality, I would give it almost a 10. For the reasons we talked about, not holding to the story, that drops it to a 7 for me. So what are we in between? 8.5, I guess, would probably be similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say pretty much the same thing. I think visually, the audio, the CGI,
Soundtrack,
even the acting, the
is
writing,
good, yeah.
all of that's a 10 out of 10 for me. The only thing is the changes, which do
Right.
drop it. I would say to an 8, so I'll put my actual judgment at 9.
9, okay.
Which, yeah, I think it's a great movie. I wanted to love this movie. I do. I think especially Fade Routh's character is just so compelling in the movie. He's just a pleasure to watch on screen. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Well, he's one of those true villains, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, he's a villain. You know,
Yeah.
maybe if he'd been raised differently, he wouldn't have been, but the way he's raised, he's a villain and he's going to be villaining.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So we've talked about Dune Part 2. We kind of outlined a little bit of the differences from the books to the movies. We outlined the synopsis, talked about some character moments, our favorite scenes. We rated it. And I guess that's all we got time for. I could keep talking for another 2 hours on Dune, but
I know.
probably
It'd be easy
shouldn't.
too. I know.
All right. This has been the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas Sterling and Andrew. We're brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right. It's free. Be sure to like and subscribe. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.